Hi, in this module, we are going to see how to use web triggers to receive messages in an interface experience coming from the outside world. First, what is a web trigger? Web triggers are messages that can be sent by any app in the world to talk to an interface experience, provided both that third-party app and interface has an internet access. You can see the architecture here in this Help Center article. In the center, we have the interface server providing a web triggers API, which can be used by either existing applications like IFTTT, if this then that, Zapier, or you can build your own web page to consume this API and send messages to your interface experiences. At the bottom of this schema, you have either Interface Composer running in play mode or Interface Player running your experiences using the web triggers interface asset, waiting to receive some messages. Now, let's see how to receive a message in an experience. In Composer, open the Add an Interface Asset panel, then search for Web, and you will see the Web Triggers component here. Select it and add it to your experience. You can look in the X-ray panel and you will see this Web Triggers interface asset has a few properties, including the player ID, which will be pretty important if you want to make sure you are targeting the right player on your account. Among the triggers, we have a message is received trigger, which will be the one raised when actually a message is received from the web. In this example, a museum experience, let's add a mechanism to handle an emergency message. We're going to add a trigger, message is received. You can specify here which kind of message you are expecting. In our case, let's say emergency. When an emergency message is received, then you can call any action. In this case, let's navigate to a scene named emergency with a crossfade transition. A message can come with up to 3 parameters. Let's add an additional trigger to enable a remote control of this experience. Let's add a new trigger on the same interface asset when a message is received. Let's use a more generic name for this message, like navigation. When receiving such a message, we could use a condition and look at our trigger properties. You have the message, which will be navigation in this case, and then the 3 parameters. You could say if parameter 1 equals biography, then navigate to the biography scene. We are going to be a bit more generic here and assume our parameter 1 will contain the name of the scene. When we receive a message navigation, then we want to navigate to a specific scene. We don't know its name, but we can use a binding. Let's bind this value on the parameter 1. Message is navigation. Parameter 1 will be either biography, artwork, etc. And that's it in Composer. It is simple as that. You can now enter the play mode and start testing your work by sending some messages to your player or your composer running in play mode. We are now going to see how to send a message through the web triggers to your experience. The most simple way of doing this to test your work and to test your experience is actually to go on your My Intuiface account, then go into the Interface API guide. We will use the Web Trigger API, and this send message method will enable you to test your work. Before doing so, you need to authorize the method, adding your own credential key. You can pass the credential key either as a header parameter or a query parameter, depending on how you will intend to use this API in the real scenario. As a reminder, you need to have a Composer Premier or Enterprise to access such credential keys. Now we are ready to send a message through this dynamic documentation. In this case, we want to send a message called emergency. We don't have any parameters required, and we are going to broadcast this message to all the experiences running on all the players on our account. If you want to specify which players, which tags, you can use one of these parameters here. You can see the experiences running in the background. I'm going to click on execute. And now you can see the experience switch to the emergency scene, asking the viewers to evacuate the building. In case this was a false alarm, we can send a new message, navigation, and specify, let's go back to the home scene. Remember, we decided in the experience in Composer that the parameter 1 would be the name of the scene. Execute. We are back to the home scene. While your player is running or your composer is running in play mode, if you use the second method, get available experiences, you will see on your account how many experiences are running having the Web Triggers interface asset inside. This will give you the ID of the experience and, more importantly, the player ID. This will be the ID to pass as a parameter to make sure that you send a message to one and only one specific player. You can also see the tags of this or these players to be able to broadcast to a subset of players on your account. Now let's move forward with our scenario. Let's say you want to provide a way for users to interact with the kiosk without touching the screen, but scanning a QR code would lead them to a small web page on their smartphone, acting as a remote control. You can easily create this web page using any web page editor, any web tool you're familiar with. I'm taking a very basic example here using CodePen. The source code which you see here is available on our Help Center articles, but basically is going to reuse the API we just used through our dynamic documentation. The main mechanism of this kind of web pages will rely on the API key and the device ID being passed in the main URL of the web page, which you can see here at the top. Now let's assume this web page is running on a smartphone which has scanned a QR code on this kiosk. So the web page knows which device ID and which API key to use in the APIs. When I'm going to click on the biography button here, you can see the experience running in my player in the background is actually going to the biography scene. Before I click on the artwork, notice here that this artwork button has a message, navigation, and a parameter 1 artwork, which is exactly the naming convention we used in the experience, enabling the user to navigate through the scenes without never touching the experience. The last step of this module will be how do you create the QR code to make the link between the experience running in the player and the smartphone. Let's create a blank scene to go step by step in this process. The full link for our web page is something like this, which is the home page or the base URL of the web page plus two parameters, the device ID to make sure you're only talking to one specific player, and the API key so that the web page is allowed to use the WebTrigger API. The API key is a static value related to your own account, but the device ID will change depending on which player is actually running the experience. So we need to dynamically build this URL. To do that, you can use an interface asset. If you search for text, you will find this text concatenation. Let's reuse the same input and split the static part from the dynamic part. So in input A, we will have the main URL up to device ID parameter. Here we'll go the dynamic device ID. And then we keep going on. Let's remove the device ID. And we want our API key being something static or maybe something dynamic. Let's split this into a fourth parameter. In this input B, I need the device ID, I need the player ID. I can use a binding and get information from our web triggers interface set using its player ID. This property will change dynamically depending on which player is running the experience. The text concatenation has one output property, which will look exactly like what we are looking for. The next step will be to encode this long URL into a QR code. You can use the QR code generator, add this to your experience. Let's add it on the scene to actually see the code which we are going to generate. And now you just need to bind this text to encode property to the output of your text concatenation. Source is here, output is here. Now that's a very long URL, so the QR code is going to be pretty complex. On top of the binding, I recommend you to add a converter, which is URL shortener, shorten URL. This will generate a tiny URL much easier to scan. That's it. You can then display this QR code on the kiosk and enable people to scan it with their smartphone and take control of the kiosk using the WebTriggers API. For more information, such as how to manage session IDs and ensure you have only one user at a time who can control one particular kiosk, please have a look at the Help Center articles about web triggers.